Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. This is Enoch's Tutorials. Don't forget to like, subscribe and also click on the notification bell so you can receive every bit of update from this channel. In this video, we are going to look at bioenergetics, which is a thermodynamic parameter which studies the flow of energy in a living system. So the term is bioenergetics as shown here. It encompasses what you call bio and energetics. So here the bio means life or a living system, and energetics is just the study of energy. So bioenergetics deals with the study of energy changes in a living system, or I say in a living cell. So bioenergetics, as we said earlier, is the study of energy in a living system. So the study of energy in a living system. So then the line word is the living system, which comes from the word bio here, and the study of energy. So how energy is being utilized in a living system and the changes it undergo is what we call bioenergetics. So bioenergetics is the study of a living system, the energy in the living system, and how the system utilizes them. That is the bioenergetics. So now let's look at some basic terms associated with the concept of bioenergetics, and let's continue. So the first thing we're going to look at here is energy. So energy, as we know, is what we mean by the ability to do work. So energy we define as the ability to do work is required by all living organisms. So every living organism requires energy for several activities. Energy is required for several metabolic and also mechanical activities, which include, let's say, production and breakdown of substances in the living system. So energy in a living system, or let's say an energy in a matter, can be in two forms based on its motion or based on its position. We can have energy which is based on a position, which we call the potential energy, and energy which is based on its motion, which we call kinetic energy. So the kinetic energy is the energy of motion. So every energy that can set itself in a motion is what we call the kinetic energy. Based on the position of the energy, you can categorize energy into two main types. You can have the kinetic energy and potential energy. So the energy of a motion is what we call the kinetic energy. For example, if you have heat energy can transfer from one form to another through, let's say, conduction or convection or by radiation. So these forms are by which energy can be transferred, or heat energy can be transferred from one position to the other. So heat energy is a kinetic energy because it can move from one position to other, either through a vacuum or, let's say, through a conducting material. We also have a light energy which can transfer from one form, or let's say from one position to the other. Taking, for example, a light energy from the sun can transfer from the atmospheres onto the earth. So light energy is another example of a kinetic energy. Now the energy of a position is what we call the potential energy. So a potential energy is a kind of energy which is of a position. So you can have it as the energy that is existing in a chemical bonds, energy in foods, energy in drugs, or every energy that is stored in a chemical bond. If energy is kept in every energy in a chemical bond, let's say if these ones are bonds and they possess some kind of energy in them, then that energy is fixed and does not involve motion. So that energy is called a potential energy. So energy in a chemical bond is what we call a potential because it does not set itself in a motion. Now these energies are basically released, or they can either be synthesized or released through what we call energy reactions. So energy reactions are reactions that involves energy production or energy usage. So we have two main types of energy reactions which either produce or, let's say, store energy. We can have what we call the endogenic energy reaction. So endogenic reaction, as it means, endogenic reaction is the type of energy reaction which requires a net input of energy into a system. So if a reaction requires you to input energy into a system before it can proceed, then we call that reaction an endogenic reaction. It is endogenic if it is any other type of energy, and it is also referred to as endothermic if it is specifically heat energy. So if it is heat energy that is being needed to supply, or what is being needed to fuel the reaction, then we call it an endothermic reaction. For example, if we have, let's say, ice and you want to melt it into water, unless you supply an external heat to it. So that reaction, the melting of ice, the chemical reaction involved is an endothermic reaction, which is a category or a type of an endergonic reaction. A typical example of an endergonic reaction is photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is an example of an endergonic reaction. Now if I have 6 moles of carbon dioxide in 6 moles of water, and let's say in a containing vessel, without any external supply of heat, or let's say external supply of energy, these two reactions can be in a container for a long time when there's not going to be any reaction to produce glucose. Rather, if I expose this one to sunlight, the photons carried by the sun waves or the sun rays is what is going to be as energy source, the external energy to supply this reaction or to fuel this reaction. So if I add photons or sun rays to this, then I'm going to produce glucose from the reaction of carbon dioxide in water. So this is the reaction, which is an example of an endergonic reaction, because without the photons of the sun rays, we call it photon. The photon is the portion of the sun rays that carries an energy. Without the photons of the sun rays, I can never proceed with this reaction of carbon dioxide and water to produce glucose and oxygen. This is a typical endergonic reaction. The next one is the exergonic reaction. The exergonic reaction, said, is the reaction, or it is the reaction type that releases energy to the system. So you have one that requires energy into the system, and the one that will release energy into the system or into the environment. So let's have this. The opposite of the photosynthesis is what we call the cellular respiration. So respiration is the opposite of photosynthesis. So if I add oxygen to glucose without any external supply of energy, I'm going to produce carbon dioxide and water. So respiration in our human system does not necessarily need an external supply of energy, but rather it releases energy into the system. So this one releases energy into the system. So we call this one an exergonic reaction. If that reaction is, let's say, any other reaction, or let's say if it is only heat energy that is being released into the system, then we call it an exothermic reaction. Exothermic reaction is a type of an exergonic reaction which releases heat and only heat into the system or into the environment. So if I add this oxygen to the glucose, I'm going to produce carbon dioxide and water, and there's going to be no net input of energy, but I'm not going to release energy to the system. This is an example of an exergonic reaction. So now let's look at the metabolic reactions of cells that can either be an exergonic or that can either be an endergonic. We have metabolism, which we define as the sum of the total of all the chemical activities of the cell. So all the biochemical reactions that exist in a living system is what we call metabolism. So the creating of substances and the synthesis of substances in a living system is by the process of metabolism. This can be that which is used to produce energy, which is used to synthesize energy, which is used to ensure, let's say, homeostasis, which is used to ensure excretion, and many others. So all the reactions in the body is what we call metabolism. We have two types of that. We have the one that breaks down a complex molecule into a smaller one, which we call catabolic. And we have the one that synthesizes a large molecule from smaller ones, which we call anabolism. So two pathways of metabolism are possible in a living system. You can have an anabolic pathway and also a catabolic pathway. So the first one is the anabolic pathway, and the second one is the catabolic pathway. So as the name implies, we have a metabolic reaction that will consume energy to build up a complicated molecule from simpler ones. So I want to synthesize very complex molecules like, let's say, glucose from simpler molecules like carbon dioxide and water. So I want to just synthesize a complex molecule, which is glucose, from a simpler molecules, carbon dioxide and water. Now this reaction is an anabolic reaction because I try to anabolize. Anabolize means that I'm going to synthesize a large molecule from smaller molecules. So we call this one an anabolic reaction. And it's an endergonic because it needs a net input of energy as usual. It is endergonic because it needs a net input of energy, or we have to get an energy source before we can proceed with anabolic reactions or synthetic reactions. The next one is a catabolic pathway or catabolic reactions, which is just the opposite of the anabolic. Whereas the anabolic synthesizes a large molecule from a smaller ones, the catabolic breaks down a large molecule into smaller ones, and it is an exergonic reaction. So it releases heat, or let's say heat energy or any other form of energy into the system or the environment. Within the system is just a confined area of study. So if you are studying in a cell, then the cell becomes your system. So if the reaction releases heat, or let's say any other type of energy into the system, we call it an exergonic reaction. So if I try to break down a large complex molecule into a smaller one, there is always a possible release of heat into or energy into the system. So if I break, let's say, glucose down by oxidation, I'm always going to produce energy into the system. So that's why I call this one an exergonic reaction. It is catabolic because it's trying to catabolize. That is, it breaks down a large molecule into a very smaller molecule like carbon dioxide and water. Now let's look at the structure of ATP, which stands for the adenosine triphosphate. Now ATP is the main storage form of energy in a living system. So all the energy in a body is derived from what we call ATP. So what then is ATP? ATP is what we call adenosine triphosphate. Adenosine triphosphate, this is the form at which energy is stored in the body. It has three main components. It has a nitrogenous base, which is called adenine. It has a 5-carbon sugar, which we call the ribose, and it has a chain of 3 phosphate groups. It has an adenine, ribose, and what we call a phosphate group. This is how it looks like. So it has a nitrogenous base, it has a sugar, then 3 phosphate groups. Now this compound is a complex compound which the body uses, or which the body stores energy in that form. It has bonds that stores energy. So we are just going to look at the structure. In the next video, we are going to look at how the ATP itself helps in the release of energy into a living system. So now let's look at the structure and bear in mind that ATP is the main form by which the body stores energy. So we have the nitrogenous base, we have the 5-carbon sugar, and the phosphate. The bond that links the nitrogenous base to the sugar, this bond is what we call the glycosidic bond. It is basically N-glycosidic bond, specifically N-glycosidic bond. Now the bond that links the sugar to the first phosphate group is what we call the phospho and ester bond. So this bond is called phospho-ester bond. Then the bond that links any two of the 3 phosphate groups is called phosphoanhydride bond. So in ATP molecule, we have 2 phosphoanhydride bonds. The phosphoanhydride bonds is a bond which we call that possesses some kind of energy that is being released into the system if there is hydrolysis. So the bond or the energy that is stored in ATP is a potential energy that is stored in a chemical bond we call the phosphoanhydride bond that upon hydrolysis releases high amount of energy into the system. So in the next video, we are going to look at the structure of ATP proper and discuss into details how basically these bonds are meant to release energy into the system upon hydrolysis. So as we just discussed here, it has 3 phosphate groups. 2 of them have high energy bonds. Then the last phosphate contains the most energy. That is, the last phosphate has the highest energy. This one has the highest energy upon hydrolysis. This bond has the highest energy. The and this one also can be hydrolyzed to produce energy. But the energy strength of this bond, the last bond, is higher than that of this one. The breaking of the bonds is what we call dephosphorylation. So the term here is called dephosphorylation. If I break the bonds of the ATP, I call it dephosphorylation. So that breaks this bond and release the phosphate into the environment, or let's say into the system. I call it dephosphorylation because it tends to release the phosphate group into the system or into the environment. This process occurs continually in a cell. It occurs continually in a cell because the cell always uses up ATP to form ATP. So if I dephosphorylate the ATP, I will form ADP. Then the ADP can also react with phosphate group by another reaction, which is more of an anabolic reaction with the investment of energy to produce back the ATP. So a cycle, as the ATP is being hydrolyzed to produce the ADP and phosphate, the two can also be dehydrated to form back the ATP. So the enzyme ATPase, which is basically involved in ATP synthesis through what we call the oxidative phosphorylation, we are going to discuss into details this in the next video. That enzymes blends ADP and phosphate through dehydration reaction to produce back ATP. So how does ATP work? This organism uses enzymes to break down energy-rich glucose to release its potential energy. So the energy in the glucose is the potential energy. And what the body does is when they break down the glucose, the energy stored in the glucose is rather what? Kept in a form of adenosine triphosphate. The body cannot really straightforward rely on the energy from the glucose unless the body breaks down the glucose energy and store that energy in a form of a phosphoanhydride bond in an ATP molecule. That can further be released or can be used when there is hydrolysis. So how much does the cell use ATP? Or how much does the cell need ATP? So it is estimated that each cell will generate and consume approximately about 10 million molecules of ATP per second. That shows how the body is having a higher affinity for ATP. If just one cell can just need this amount of ATP for just 1 second, then you can imagine the number of ATPs consumed in 1 second in the body, because the body is made of millions of cells. So you have to ensure proper consumption of food so that you can have a net production of higher ATP molecules for us to supply the body with enough ATP where the cells can consume them for their metabolic activities. Let's have some kind of coupled reactions. So we call the coupled reactions coupled reactions. They mean they're just coupled. So that is two reactions that occurs at the same time. That is when one reaction is meant to help the other to proceed. It's what we call the coupled reaction. So you have coupled reactions of ATP. We can have a reaction. So hexagonic reaction of ATP is coupled with endogonic dehydration process by transferring a phosphate group to another molecule. As we just discussed here, if I have an ATP and I want to get energy, I will break down the ATP into ADP and phosphate. And if I have the ADP and I want to form back the ATP, I have to again invest in some kind of energy to be able to produce ATP from ADP and phosphate. These two reactions is the coupled reaction because you need ATP hydrolysis to fuel ATP dehydration or ADP and phosphate dehydration to form back the ATP. So let's have this. If I hydrolyze ATP molecule, the forward reaction is more of a hydrolysis reaction, whereas the backward reaction is going to be a dehydration reaction. These two reactions are coupled reactions because for you to be able to dehydrate ADP and phosphate to form ATP, unless you hydrolyze ATP, because when you hydrolyze ATP, you are going to produce a net energy, which is basically of enough quantity to be able to supply this reaction to proceed. So the backward reaction is an endogonic reaction, then the forward reaction is an hexagonic reaction. The forward is an hexagonic reaction because it's going to release some kind of energy to the system upon the hydrolysis or the breakage of the phosphoanhydride bond that exists between the ATP molecule. So if I add water to an ATP molecule, I'm going to cleave first the first phosphoanhydride bond to form the ADP, which is this N-phosphate. So when I break the first bond, I'm going to release energy into the system. Now, hydrolysis is an exergonic reaction. Why? Because it's going to release energy which is stored in this bond to the cells for the cells to use. So when I break down ATP by hydrolysis, the high energy bond here is the phosphoanhydride bond, which releases energy into the system for the body to use for its metabolic activities. The next one is the dehydration of ATP. These two reactions are coupled reactions because you need hydrolysis of ATP to fuel dehydration of ADP and phosphate to form ATP and water back. So if I dehydrate ATP, I remove a hydroxy group from the ADP and a hydrogen from the phosphate to form water. Then that bond can link up to form another phosphoanhydride bond to form the ATP molecule. So I have this ADP molecule and I have phosphate. When I blend the two, I'm going to form the phosphoanhydride bond, which forms ATP. This reaction is an endergonic reaction because it needs an external supply of energy. And that external supply of energy comes from the hydrolysis of ATP. Dehydration is endergonic because it stores energy in chemical bonds. So the energy is being stored in a chemical bond like the phosphoanhydride bond. That's how the structure of ATP looks like. Now, in the next video, we are going to look at the structure of ATP proper, how it is synthesized, and the mechanism that leads to the release of energy into the system upon hydrolysis or the storage of energy into ATP by dehydration. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. This is enough tutorial. Press the notification bell so you can receive every bit of update from this channel. Thank you.